So thank you all for attending this IGEL Community Tech Deep Dive videos and or webinar. We have our monthly meetups, and the monthly meetups tend to be, Q&As, and they're all over the board. And then we started to do a few more technical deep dives. And now Sebastian works with the community, works with me. So we have this great technical resource to really start doing a lot more technical deep dives. So today we're going to talk about IGEL UMS and what I wish I knew when I started at IGEL with Sebastian. So I'm excited about this one. We do have a lot, like I said, we do a lot of these things. We will be doing even more and more and more. The biggest problem we have is actually finding time to do all these so that we don't end up with one every other day. But coming soon, in April, we have IGEL Geek Speak, VIP Geek Speak. I'm really looking forward to this. We have no agenda yet. I guess Sebastian and I will probably put together some basic list of things we want to discuss, and then we'll see where it goes. And these guys are all IGEL experts, so it'll be a lot of fun asking them questions, having you folks ask them questions, and sort of really learning, talking about whatever, right? It's a geek speak. Lord knows what's going to happen. And then we're going to dive into part 2 of a webinar that Sebastian did just last month or 2 months ago. Usual technical issues explained and solved with our hero here, Seb. And then in May, I'm really looking forward to this one. We're going to have a security deep dive Q&A with Matthias Huber, and he's one of our security guys at IGEL. And we're going to be able to ask, questions so relating to IGEL and security. So please sign up for future events at igelcommunity.com/events. Also, if you're new to the IGEL community, if you joined because you saw this on social or someone invited you or what have you, and you're not already a community member, please join in. We do have additional resources. Check out our website, www.igelcommunity.com. And then, of course, our archive site at archives.igelcommunity.com. And last but not least, we're really excited about this. As we started creating a lot more videos and storing these, where do we store these videos? In the past, we sort of put them in Slack. The problem was you might not have seen them in there, and then they ended up way up the list. There's no way to really easily find them. So we created a little video site on igelcommunity.com where we store all these videos that we're creating, these great technical resources. You see, today's the 30th of March, and we already posted a deep dive technical video that Sebastian made. In fact, every Tuesday, we have what we call Tuesday Tech Tips. And Tech Tip Tuesday. Well, that's easy for me to say, right? Easier for you to do, more difficult for me to say. And where Sebastian's going to be posting about, a 9, 10, 11, 15-minute video focusing on a specific topic that we see a lot within the IGEL community, folks asking questions, or just something we know you really need to know how to do. So very pointed videos on a specific technical topic. If you have suggestions for topics you would like Sebastian to dive into and do one of these videos on, please let us know. IGEL community at igel.com is a great way, or brown@igel.com. So last but not least, we're going to turn it over to Sebastian to dive through his stuff. I'm really looking forward to this. But if you please ask questions, but when you do have questions, use the Q&A piece of Zoom. Do not use the chat. Please use chat to chat. But if you have questions, use the Q&A piece, and Sebastian will get those at the very end. So with no further ado, Seb, the floor is yours. I imagine you have some stuff to share, so I'll stop my sharing.
Too much honor. So
I'm looking forward to this one because when I joined IGEL, I had to learn the UMS, and I'm curious if what you wish you knew is what I wish I knew, which is really, I wish I knew everything. So I wish I knew how to install it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit of history, I guess, because that could be just a short introduction from myself. When I started at IGEL, it was something like 7 years ago, and so we had a first office outside of Bremen, outside of Augsburg. It was nearby Frankfurt in Germany, so in the middle of Germany. But I was more or less alone. So it was the first office where we had no colleagues there, no team members. Everything went through phone conferences and Skype to that moment. And honestly, I didn't spoke that much English before joining IGEL, so everything was in English, written, spoken, and yeah, it was sometimes tough to find an answer to a question that I had, because yeah, like an every job, after a short training, something like 2 hours, I went to the first customer facing event, and I had to fix some funny issues. And to that moment, I didn't use Linux that much, so I wasn't using IGEL devices with IGEL OS, but really IGEL OS devices with Windows operating system on it. So yeah, I tried to gather some informations, and I tried to rethink about what would I want to hear if I would join IGEL today. So let me just stop my video, because you don't want to see my ugly face during all that presentation. So yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sebastian, working as a Director of Community and Senior Engineer since the beginning of this year. Before that, I was a pre-sales engineer and a team lead of the enterprise pre-sales, and now more than happy to be a full-time member of the community. So let's do a short intro about part 1, because what you will see today will cover maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes, 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Depends a little bit from how fast we can go through the topic, but still it's painful to pack every content to you audience, because we have high skill level people who use IGEL for 20 years maybe, and some who went the road to the community because they're new customers. So if you don't see a benefit in the first slides, please stay until the end, because you might know or learn something. So the short agenda, everything is related to the Universal Management Suite this time. So in short term, UMS. The installation, the administration part, and the best practice and logs and folders are a little bit mixed and not a hard cut between the topics. Sometimes there is, but I tried to put everything together in a, let's say, a fluent way. So for those of you who already attended community meetup sessions before, you know that I'm usually trying to find something related to the data of today, which is, if possible, related to something technical, to something, let's say, technology driven. And I found that one on Wikipedia for 2017. So SpaceX, I guess every one of you is knowing what SpaceX do and who is owning that company. But they had the plan to reuse, to repurpose orbital class rockets, or kind of rocket, to not use it just one time, but a couple of times. And that's where we are today doing the same stuff, but on the knowledge level. So recycle a little bit what I learned through UMS 4 to UMS 607 100 launch yesterday. So yeah, recycle in that specific case. So the UMS installation, all of you already went down the road. And since we have distributors, resellers, their customers, and also system integrators in the call, I would just share a few questions that I'm sharing internally to my colleagues when it comes to the installation process itself. So the first one is, where do you want to install the UMS? Question is quite obvious. If you want to use the Azure part or an on-prem server, it makes a lot of differences. Are the users facing the IGEL OS operating system inside of your company, or as a teleworker working from home or from remote offices? Just because it will point you out to an ICG installation or not. How many devices are planned? Not even speaking about the UMS HA need or not, more speaking about the sizing of the server. If you use, I don't know, 20 devices, or let's say 100, you don't need 24 gigs of RAMs and 8 vCPUs. You just have to rethink the sizing itself. One important stuff is, where do the person you're talking to feeling comfortable? In which kind of operating system environment? Most of the administrators I'm speaking to, Windows administrators, so they're feeling more comfortable on the Windows server side with a GUI, obviously. And that's the reason why we can do both. We can install UMS on Linux and on Windows, but yeah, I'm always asking before we start, because sometimes I already have Linux servers. available, and we don't need a Windows license for that, but mostly I must say to 80% we're speaking about Windows. Default redundancy, HA, load balancing, that's a question that is need to be asked after the POV phase. So where you are talking to the customer and want to use it in a production way. So that's a part where our advanced services colleagues take over. And for those of you who are already using the UMS itself, you are maybe knowing that we have an embedded database, which is Derby database from Apache, that we are using as a common and standard database, but you are also free to use an external SQL database, which makes sense if you want to speed up a little bit the request coming from the UMS service to the database, and just because of data redundancy and performance treatment. So on the other hand, now we spoke about everything which is related to the backend and to UMS server, but we have also the endpoints. And on the endpoint side, how do you want to deploy updates? It's not a really important question during the installation process, but it would guide you into the direction of, would it make sense to order a separate FTP or HTTP server in prior, just to be sure that the service is already set up for your installation process on the customer end? I just want to skip that one because backups, yeah, it's such a difficult and complex topic that it's just a question to ask, where and how do you want to back up your server? If we speak about the embedded database, I will just share a few thoughts on that one, even if I wanted to skip it. Let's think about a snapshotting process of your virtual machine. Yes, it will definitely cover a specific state of everything which is on during that snapshotting process on the VMware or whatever hypervisor side. But if, and that's quite to happen, if you snapshot the UMS server and just during that moment a transaction is written to the embedded database, and you want to restore that snapshot, it's highly possible that the database might be corrupted after that. So that's the reason why I'm always using, if I'm using a database, a separate backup job. We'll see that a little bit later on. On the other hand, if I'm using an external SQL, you should be good because the snapshot isn't affecting the database that much. So that would be one step to speak with the SQL administrator. Just in case, we have a lot of different knowledge sources at the moment available on the internet. Also, if you want to use a specific document that we call the POV checklist, you're free to use them. Just ask us, please, and I will be happy to forward to you. We are putting all information together about how the sizing is working, which ports need to be open, which websites do you need to know, and where do you need to get onboarded to deliver license. Because for those of you who already are using IGEL on OS 11, we introduced a couple of changes also on the ILP, so the IGEL licensing portal regarding the products. So that makes sense to onboard the customer before even starts to install the UMS server. Since you ask a lot of questions, you might have the part where the person sitting in front of you is asking, what should I do with the UMS, or what can I do with it? I would first ask, who is using the UMS as an end user? Are we mostly speaking about an help desk, so support engineers? What kind of VDI terminal server solution do you need to deploy to the endpoint? If the marketing abteilung is quite strong, you might have to deal with corporate identity stuff like virtual, with boot splash and wallpapers, etc. Or if you're allowed to use a connection through the internet to the IGEL licensing portal, we want to do it online, want to do it offline, just with license files. And all of that is mostly coming together when you come to the proxy port configuration or the firewall. So always set and ask for the right expectation from the end. So enough theory now. We are coming to the hopefully the most and more interesting part of the presentation. I tried to cover the installation wizard. So yes, I know we have the 607, but I didn't recreate it, the screenshot between yesterday and today. It's still the 606 110 version. So that the installer you get from the myiGEL.biz website, like an example. And then you go through the wizard. Nothing really interesting to share. So after you accepted the licensing term and this kind of stuff, you go to next, and let's get a little bit more interesting. Let's think about where do you want to put your files. Here we are speaking about the whole server part, about executables that you need for your Tomcat, for configuration exchange with the endpoint, etc. So just be in mind, it doesn't have to be on C. You can change it to whatever you like on D, M, or whatever. In that case, if we don't speak about anything else, remember that all the files will be located there. Also, some UMS file transfer stuff that we might cover a little bit later on. When it comes to the feature sets, even if it's, let's say, interesting or in some specific cases recommended to use an HA, honestly, if you want to keep it simple, and that's my recommendation, go a little bit away from the higher availability network itself. It's a really great product, and since it's integrated by default in the Workspace Edition licensing, where on OS 10 and OS 5 you needed a separate license for that, a license per device. So if you had 10,000 devices, you needed 10,000 HA licenses. Now you can install it by your own and install 110 or 100 UMS server if you need it. And when I say when you need it, it's really a please think about, do you really need a high availability network? Why that? The complexity of the information exchange between the endpoint and your UMS server would increase. And you will also have to do some network setup in your environment. Just because of a high availability and load balancing and failover scenarios, it doesn't make that much sense to use HA. You can definitely go from the standard UMS server, because since even if the UMS server itself isn't there for a couple of hours, all your devices will still be functional. The only part of our operating system where it might interfere with your daily business is shared workplace, but let's cover that a bit later on. So the only thing I would think about, and that's another time, is you want to use an embedded database or an external one. You can already make the choice here, or just start with embedded database and copy it later on. Requirements. We had already a couple of discussions in the community about extreme slow loading of the UMS console, or some weird red cross error messages during the console boot up, or that the IGEL RM GUI server didn't even start it properly. Keep in mind, please, that if you're using an embedded database, the UMS web app, and all of that on the same server, like the UMS console 2, you need about 10 GB of RAM on the virtual machine. Even better, I'm always using 12 just to be sure that all the stuff that is happening on the operating system level is covered too, which is just my personal opinion. So just keep in mind, even if you're updating all the UMS on a new version, check the RAM amount. Now remember, we already covered the IGEL files a little bit earlier on. They don't need to be on C double dot. Same for the device files. You might know that the UMS server is mostly based on the Tomcat. And inside of the Tomcat, we have a web directory, a web dev called UMS_file transfer. We'll see that a little bit on the file system, but just keep in mind that all the files that you are delivering to the endpoint, like certificates, corporate identity files, universal firmware updates, custom partitions. On the other hand, files that you want to transfer from the endpoint to the UMS, like log files in specific cases, or local files you want to exchange with your UMS, they would be uploaded to the UMS file transfer directory too. So that might be the folder besides the embedded database where you will need most of the disk space during your installation. So on some specific customer environment, we needed to redirect that folder to an external partition. That isn't needed anymore. You can choose a specific data directory in your folder structure or partition folder that fit in your expectation. So in worst case, you could have two different working directories, one for the server, mentioned a little bit earlier, and the second one for the file that you exchange with your endpoint. If you use the embedded database, you specify a username and a password during that process. And you wouldn't think about how many times this username isn't functioning anymore. Mostly, even if there are some exceptions, mostly because the username is case sensitive. So if you entered IGEL admin with an uppercase A, you need it to during the login process. So just be aware that it is case sensitive. Last thing, because on 605 or 606, I would have to lie and double check in the release notes, we introduced a separation between the super user and the database user. So in former times, the user you specified here was the main administrator user with all the rights inside of your UMS. And at the same time, the database user needed to connect to your Derby embedded database. That isn't the case anymore. So you can have two different usernames, two different passwords if you want. But let's see that later on. The firewall rules now are inside of the installation wizard and can be added automatically during the installation, which is pretty helpful, and I would say avoid a lot of discussions with administrators and network administrators when it comes to communication issues. So start menu folder isn't that interesting, go to next, install, and now your UMS server is installing slowly but surely on your Windows server. And you should be good. So that's what you should be if the installation went through without any kind of issues. But after work, I'm sharing with my customer or partner or whatever a few thoughts about, hey, just to be sure, before starting the console, let's check a few things. First, don't forget to check the antivirus. If you have something like semantic endpoint protection or McAfee or whatever, just to be sure, check if some access errors happened or some Java exception access exploit went detected. We'll just avoid you a little bit of gray hair in some specific cases. First thing. Second thing, just because you will not remember everything that I'm telling today, and you might not have remembered that we need 10 gigabytes of RAM, please check if the IGEL RM GUI server, so the service itself, is started. Same for the IGEL - Elasticsearch, which is, the second service now installed when it comes to UMS Web App and the web browser folder. Last one, open before starting with the UMS console, the so-called UMS administrator, which isn't the UMS administration. Let's go into that too. For older customers, not from the age, but from the IGEL experience, the RM admin was the main administrative tool used for configuring your UMS server. It started with Wake on LAN, with external web dev components, so XP snapshots folders. You could configure everything related to the automatic registration process, etc. Now it just covers a couple of things, but they're still important. First thing, the settings it sets on the left hand, your device communication port, the web server port, etc. Every port which is coming from the endpoint to the UMS can be configured here if needed. The only thing I would like to mention here, because it makes sense to think about that, if you don't use older devices, I mean, like OS 4, 3, and some older Windows XPE versions, you might think about only allow SSL connections. That means that the standard non-encrypted file transfer port 9080 will be disabled, and only the 8043 port will be open. And that makes sense because you want to transfer your certificate authority files or your universal firmware update files in an encrypted way. If you want to use the automatic license deployment, and you might have found that the UMS licensing ID is one of the easiest way to deploy your license between the ILP and your endpoints. And in that case, it's my personal opinion. I prefer the UMS licensing ID instead of the IID token approach. I would recommend to create a one-time backup of that UMS licensing ID because it's unique. I mean, it doesn't mean that you will lose all your licenses if you have no access to the UMS licensing ID anymore. But if you want to migrate your server from server A to server B, you will need to restore the UMS licensing ID backup to the new server to be in sync. That's not the case if your server is gone or you forget that one. Then you have to delete the UMS licensing ID in your license portal, create a new one, and re-import that one. I mean, it isn't that bad, but you have to do some manual steps which aren't needed if you created a backup. And just because I like backups, I must say I love backups. I'm creating a second approach when it comes to manual backup files. We'll cover it a bit later on the automatic, the scheduled backups. But in that case, let's imagine you want to migrate from 606 UMS to 607. It's always a good approach to make a manual backup, even if it's done during the update process, if you checked it, to create a manual backup just before starting. And on that note, I just want to share one thing. If you use the embedded database, you have the ability to create a whole backup of everything coming from with your database. You transferred files from the UMS file transfer folder as soon as they are uploaded via files, your license files, and a couple of other configurations made inside of your UMS server. If you're using an external one, you will miss the embedded database part because the backup is then covering everything which is related to anything other than DDB. But just in case it makes sense to make it there too, because you might want to migrate your files from server A to server B. But one thing that I just want to mention is, please set the directory to a corresponding unique folder. The reason why is, if you create scheduled backups and you want to restore them, you first have to change the directory to the directory where the backups are located. Last but not least, the database window. Mostly overseen, and I guess not really well known because you don't have to use that tool and let that window search off. First thing why you should or might get into that window is, if you want to migrate your embedded database to an external SQL, you will go to Add and connect to your new SQL server, create a database there, and then, thanks to the copy button, copy your embedded database into the SQL. But you might also think about changing the password database, password, sorry. So coming back to our installation process, if you remember, we had the discussion about the UMS super user, which is now a separate user, and the user from your database. You can change both here inside of that window. So your main super user from the UMS console and the DB type and the DB password itself. That happens quite often if your main administrator left the company and he didn't enter all the password he created into a password database or whatever on his documentation. And you're now lost if it comes to, hey, how can I retrieve the data, or how can I get back to the main administrator user? If you have access to the UMS server itself through ADP or SSH, then you can access that tool and with that the password in accordance. When it comes to database, to the embedded database performance, you might have all noted that we have an optimized database button just over there. And yes, it might make sense to achieve that feature at least one time after your mass rollout, just because some primary keys and indexes will be recreated and might a little bit enhance the performance between the UMS server and the embedded database. Don't expect a change between night and day, but more expect just a check that everything is there, and that if something went wrong, it might be correct in that moment. Especially if you get some SQL errors during the usage of the UMS console, like an example. That might be one approach. And a second approach when it comes to SQL errors, even if it will not solve everything, definitely not, but it might solve easy issues. You can just click on your database, go to deactivate, wait a couple of seconds, and go to activate. Then you will have to re-enter the UMS database password, and the database will not be checked. So if some data inconsistency happened, if something happened which is easy to handle, this process should at least repair your database in that moment. We are mostly done with the UMS administrator. Let's come back to folder and files before going to the console itself. We're still looking at a Windows server, right? So a Linux one would be a separate topic, but we might get them covered too. It's just a different root folder, but the principle is the same. So remember, we spoke about the after-work checks and spoke about the antivirus, the firewall, but also about an install log file. This log file is created during the installation process and should also be filled out after and during an update process. So the install log might help you if you get some issues during the installation, after the installation, or whatever errors you might have if you just installed or re-updated the server. Just in case, because I didn't mention it separately, the question and answer section will definitely be covered at the end. I will try to keep 5 to 10 minutes to cover all your questions, and everything that I didn't cover will be covered afterwards. So coming back to the folder and files, that's the content of the install log file. So you see, in my case, it's a standard installation. Nothing really weird happened. So we have just one warning that no data source found in server.xml, but nothing really scary. So that's fine. But just in case, now you know where to check it. If you went through the IGEL community a couple of times, you might already have seen that if someone is struggling with configuration issues, or let's say configuration that didn't reach the endpoint, or the endpoint communication back to the UMS isn't working, we are checking a lot of things on the network level. But when it comes to what you can check on the UMS side, the Catalina log, which is the, I would call it the web service general log file, will cover everything which is related to the communication itself. So if your device cannot get a configuration from the UMS because it was a wrong certificate or whatever, you should find it there. If a file isn't there anymore in the file system, like a certificate file, but it's still in the UMS under files, that also could be a first approach to check. And if the Catalina log didn't help, you have a couple of other log files who might also help, but honestly, most of them are useless when it's come to the pure communication between an endpoint and the UMS. But I just have missed some use cases, definitely, but that's just my first sharing. Remember, we already spoke about the UMS underscore file transfer folder, this web dev folder where we exchange files between the UMS and the endpoint, like firmware updates, firmware customizations, etc. That's where you would look at, that's your UMS file transfer folder. The console itself also holds logs, and that's usually under your user and under .igel. And there you have, if you have the admin, the RM admin, so the UMS administrator installed on your server, and you want to access log files, it's also there. When it comes to firmware update files that when partially downloaded, but not completely, and you deleted them from your recycle bin inside of your UMS console, but still you cannot download them anymore, whatever you like on firmware update download processes. The folders I'm showing you now are folders where you might have a look if bigger files, let's say everything more than 200, 300 megabytes are listed. And if yes, check if it corresponds to the firmware file you're trying to download. If yes, I would cut them into a temporary folder and retry, because that's usually broken firmware download files that might block upcoming downloads. Coming back to your memories again, we had the UMS administrator part, right? And in the UMS administrator part, I talked about the UMS backups. And all that backups are so-called pback files. And guess what? They are just standard archives. So you don't need to import everything into the UMS administrator and restore your backup just to access your files. No, just open it with a 7-zip or whatever you like and go through the archive itself. And if you want to retrieve files that you might have deleted under your console, under files, that's where you can look at it. And you don't have to tweak around with some command line comments. No, just open it, extract what you like, and recover your files. For older IGEL OS builds, and we have already a GitHub manual regarding that topic coming from Faculty, if I remember right, but just in case, older devices that are communicating with the UMS are not able to be managed anymore just because we switched from the certificate level to TLS 1.2. And on the other hand, if you speak about the performance itself, you might remember that I spoke about the 64-bit UMS console and that we are now able to allocate maybe some more memory than we did before. So we don't need the UMS HA cluster anymore. That's mostly because of this max HTTP header size, which gives the possible RAM amount that the server will take for getting more performance. Be careful with that. Don't go to, I don't know, 120 gigabytes like that. It's more just a first approach. If you're seeing that you're getting more and more devices, just to check if the allocated RAM instead of the Tomcat config file fits on it. And older TLS files, if you want to use older ones, you can add the 1.1 and just 1 to the enabled protocols. But like I said, just for older OS versions of IGEL OS. Registry. Even if we are mostly a Linux company, and even if we are not looking at the Windows registry that often, you might have sometimes the need, or maybe just the interest to know, hey, where are all the settings that IGEL is doing located? And yeah, admin config is here. We have the console config, and you might already have asked yourself, how can I clear up the last username history that we are seeing here? That's what you find under RM user. And you can delete everything in that, in that area, and you will get the username cleared up. And sometimes it's a good idea to make that just because you entered maybe your password instead of the username field, and you just want to clear that up, that no one is seeing what kind of password you are using. And last but not least, a quick search history is also stored inside of the console config registry path. Now coming to the tricks. Nothing, maybe something really new to you, but just wanted to share, just to be sure that we are speaking about the same stuff. The login process. 99% of you might already know it, but if you're opening the UMS console on the UMS server itself, you don't need to enter an IP address, a local host, or 127.001. No, just keep it empty. It will recognize itself without the need to enter something. On the login process itself, after you log in, you might already have asked yourself what kind of logo is meant if the device is purple or if you have a red device. That's the endpoint legend, and it's available inside of the UMS console. Before that, you had to go to kb.igel.com or ask a process engineer to answer your question, or your support engineer. Don't need anymore, you can use it by yourself inside of the UMS console. Speaking about the firmware statistics, it's a small feature that just a couple of users of the UMS console are knowing, I guess. The firmware statistics to check how many and which firmware versions are in your database. Why I'm saying database? Because every firmware that is imported into the database, important note for myself, I'm not speaking about the universal firmware update. I'm speaking about firmware imports. I'll try to explain it in a few seconds. Needs about 30 megabytes, something between 20 and 40 megabytes per firmware inside of your database. That's what I have been told. It's just an average value. So if you go into that menu, into the firmware statistics, you will see a couple of them, especially if you're using UMS over years. You might find a lot of different versions there. What is an unused firmware? An unused firmware is if no device is using the firmware, so not having that firmware installed, and if no profile is based on that firmware. If both are not in use, it's a so-called unused firmware. And that's what you can do in the remove unused firmware window. Important note on that one, you can do that automatically in an admin task, but also a short note that the first firmware that you imported into your database cannot be deleted. So even if it was an older Windows NT embedded IGEL OS, it will stay there forever. So let's come back to the UMS administration and what I would have been happy to be told when I started at IGEL. Short note, on 607, there is also another feature inside of that window, but let's cover what we had until now. So the UMS features, I'm enabling everything just because template profile and master profiles are really cool features if you know how to use them. And usually I'm explaining them to the customer when I'm coming to the profiles. That might be the part number 2 of our session. So just keep in mind, enable template profile and master profiles doesn't hurt at all. It will help you a lot. MISC settings. Not that much to share here, but just keep in mind that a checkbox is enabled by default. It's called Enable User Login History. If you want to get the last Citrix user that went used on the endpoint during the login process, or check which user logged in when on which device, you can do that on IGEL OS and on the UMS side. But you need two different settings. One is the user login history that you are seeing here, enabled by default. And a second one, and I was thinking that it was in the same PowerPoint slide, so let me double check a little bit later on, but you need a second part, which is in the IGEL OS part. Just because of data privacy, it's not enabled everywhere, because some companies don't want to see who is working on which device and when, because you can track the login and log off events. So you need to activate it in a profile, but I will come back to that later on. Just keep in mind that's part number one of the configuration. The messages. If you right-click a device or folder, you can send a visual message to the endpoint. Nothing really highly important to share on that one, but it's a really good idea to make that available if a system fail is happening, like your Citrix environment or VMware environment is down for whatever reason you like. And customers are contacting the support quite heavily because they're asking what happened, why can I not log into my application or whatever. Hey, just think about, again, to maybe send a message to your end user by using the UMS, because it just doesn't cost a lot of performance, and you might leverage a little bit your support calls by setting up some proactive information to your end user. Mail settings, well, keep it short. If you want to send out reports from UMS, or in specific cases, error messages from your UMS to an email address, it might make sense to enter here mail relay. No rocket science here. Just enter your mail relay, test it, and you should be able to use this feature in other section of your UMS, like on views. Just keep in mind that we can use the result of a view as an email. Logging, extremely important. Please enable both of them because you want to use the logging and the event logging. Just be aware that there is a little side note at the bottom of the window. And it cannot be red, bold, and big enough. If you activate that feature, your database will get a lot of information to store. And honestly, you don't need any kind of logging forever. You just need it for a couple of weeks, days, hours maybe. So let's think about doing a cleanup task after that. Remote access is related to the shadowing, so remote support access to your endpoint. Honestly, nothing really important to share. Just one thing. If you want to leverage a little bit your network usage and speed up a little bit your remote shadowing, just change the color of that to 8-bit, because it's more than enough to help a user if he or she is asking for help. Active Directory, just in case, is needed for the UMS console, not for the endpoint in general. So it's linking your UMS to specific groups of your Active Directory, but it's also needed if you want to use the Active Directory login when you use the shared workplace. So just to sum up, this feature isn't needed if you want to log in locally into your Active Directory, but is needed if you want to log in on the endpoint on the Active Directory by using the shared workplace feature. Shared workplace means that profiles aren't assigned to an endpoint anymore, but on an Active Directory user. So if you have a left-handed user and this person is subject to move from one device to another, that's something that you could assign to her or his Active Directory user, and he or she can move away from one device to another and will keep that setting of all devices. Right one now. Also pretty short but helpful tool. If you send out a magic packet from your UMS to your endpoint, it's a 50-50 chance that it will work or not. If you have a network where the routing of the magic packet is enabled, then great, it will work. But if not, and that's most of the customers I'm looking at, it's a good idea to check the checkbox on the bottom of this window. I've just cut it a little bit too much out, but it's called automatic wake and proxy detection. That's first step. That means that the UMS will check if a device is available in this subnet you want to reach, and will send that device a UMS command and say, hey, the device, can you please send the magic packet inside of this virtual LAN or inside of this branch office network to your endpoint directly, without having the need to check from the UMS to the endpoint you want to wake up. So that, I would say, gives you a 90% chance that the wake on LAN will work, even if your network guys are not aware of it. But in specific cases, it may also make sense to use a dedicated wake on LAN proxy that you can definitely use in combination with the automatic wake on LAN proxy detection. If you define one device per location to be a wake on LAN proxy, this device cannot be shut down anymore by the device itself. So if you use it pressing the power button or is going to the menu and going to shut down, the device will not shut down anymore. It will just stay there with that error message. This error message is translated into German, French, etc. So just in case, this device could also be used, if you want to define it as wake on LAN proxy, as a buddy master. Because a buddy master, different topic for updates, we might cover in an upcoming session, is how to deploy an update inside of a network without having the need to deploy it to 10 devices, but just to one, and having it as an update master, or let's say a mirror server instead of the location. Universal firmware update, yeah. Just check if you want to, if you can connect to the IGEL update service to download the firmware update. And in case if you have a separate FTP server, you can define it here, and the UMS will download the universal firmware update file to that FTP server directly. Might make sense if you have an ICG server and most of your devices are outside of your company and you have a public FTP, then you could enter it here and the UMS will do the job for you. If for directory rules, like an Outlook rule, if an email is incoming from Max Mustermann or from John Smith, please move it into the folder John Smith. That's what the default directory rule is doing, but with devices. So if a device is booting up and has a specific IP address, the default directory will push it directly into the folder where you define the rule. I guess that's already known. So just in case, I just want to share a little hint. You can go on a folder and right-click the folder and go to find default directory rule directly. So you see which rules are assigned to that folder from your UMS console. Proxy, just keep it, nothing really funny to share here. But now the administrative task, and I would say that I would keep it until the end, so about 4 minutes, and then we'll go into the question and answer section to check everything that I didn't see until now. So remember, we had the logging feature activated, and I said it's a good idea to create cleanup tasks. That's an administrative task. And I'm mostly creating a task for each part that you are here in red. So logging data, job execution data, administrative task, execution data, and process events, deletion. Just because I'm not sure how long it will take. And yeah, I don't know which kind of other process I work on this server. I'm leaving 30 minutes between each jobs, just to be sure that no concurrent tasks are blocking themselves. So that was just a short cleanup task I would like to share with you. Second one, remember, we spoke about the mail relay. That's something that you can use for sending out a view automatically to a mail recipient. So let's imagine you have a company and you are doing some hosting for them, and you want to send them out an actual list of devices that you want to use for your builds, you can do that by using the export view result via email. Or if you want to do the same stuff, but more automatically into our CMDB, you can also export the view with all your devices into a CSV format into the file system, where your CMDB can retrieve the information and import it directly into the database that you're using for your CMDB. Just an example. And last but not least, in that window, the assign objects to the devices of a view. Remember, a view is a dynamic filter of devices, of endpoints that you choose, like all online devices, all devices that are not on 11 or 5 120. And now you also you are allowed to assign object like a firmware update, like a profile, a master profile, automatically on that view. Manually can be done by right-clicking the view, but you can also do that automatically, like for firmware updates, from the administrative task approach. So let me check. We have 1 minute before 6, so I would say let's cut here and jump into the question and answer section.
Sebastian,
yeah,
that was great stuff. Absolutely great stuff. And I wrote in the chat, if you guys need to leave, please do. We are recording this and we'll post it up either tonight or tomorrow, depending on how long it takes to get the thing downloaded and edited. But otherwise, you ready to jump into Q&A? I can ask them and you can answer. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so advantages, disadvantages of having IGEL UMS and ICG on AWS, or maybe Azure for that fact.
Well, when speaking about 6 or 7 UMS, you have no support for that kind of hypervisors like Cloud, Azure, AWS. Before that, it wasn't properly spoken supported. So that's the first thing I want to share. Second one is, well, disadvantages on AWS or Azure, honestly, besides the fact that it depends where you're located, I don't see any kind of issue there. It's more depending on how you want to access the endpoint. So if you're speaking about an Azure or AWS, I would even think about ICG. That's just my note, because the UMS itself isn't meant to be an internet-facing server. To speak about an ICG in between, I'm all good.
You bet, you bet. And we do have the ICG already up in Azure Marketplace, correct? So you can actually use that, or you don't even have to install it yourself. You just have to follow the steps and let them do it for you. So
exactly.
Yeah. So can you talk about what changes we will need to be made within the UMS with the updated license portal next month? Excuse me.
No issue. Honestly, not until now, because the session where we should have been informed how to deal with that is happening right now. So it's happening during the meetup. So I will keep the recording after that, and I will inform the community as soon as we are allowed to share something, but I will.
You got it. And that's another great value of the IGEL community. So as we learn about these things, we'll be posting and sharing them with you. And if you have any questions, you can reply back to that post or just reach out to one of us and we'll be able to get you answers. So definitely, if you're not a member, please join. If you are a member, you know exactly what to do. So if UMS was installed on the C drive, but now you want to move it to the D drive, is there a process to follow post-install?
There is no really guidance, but from my side, I'm mostly reinstalling everything. So I'm doing a backup of the embedded database, of the files, etc., and obviously doing a really big snapshot of everything. And then I'm uninstalling the whole UMS server on that instance and reinstalling it properly, moving it from one partition to another worked in specific cases, but I would try to avoid it. So I would definitely make backup, snapshot, uninstall, delete the folders you have seen just before. So under your program files or whatever, wherever you installed the UMS, and then delete and reinstall it.
Perfect, perfect. I agree. When will the UMS collect all make and models from HP and Dell devices within the UMS database so we can report on which make and model are deployed with IGEL clients?
Okay. I would say I can imagine what is meant, but okay, I will speak the answer. So the answer is, in general, it should already work this way. So you should be able to see model number and brand from your device when looking at the asset inventory information or in the view itself. But I know that a couple of devices are just shown up as UC1-LX. Is the device variant recognized? Honest answer on that one, I cannot answer it. I'm sure we are working on it, but I cannot say why it happened that way. And since I cannot answer this question, I cannot answer your question, because I'm not sure where it hangs. If it's something related to BIOS or to the installation mode, honestly, I cannot give you an answer on that one.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, that might be a great question too when Matthias comes with us. In the next few months when we bring him back, is sort of ping him on those type of questions. He's the right guy. If we don't do it well, it's not on a roadmap to fix. You talk to him or Jed, and maybe it'll get done, right? So, yes. Should you ask if you will deploy files to the IGEL devices like wallpaper, URL images, etc.? How will that affect the IGEL UMS requirements like CPU and space?
A lot. To make it short, a lot. If you speak about the download process or firmwares, that's one of the most demanding tasks happening on your UMS server. If you're just pushing, let's say, configurations or jobs, comments from the UMS to the endpoint and from the endpoint to the UMS, let's say in every average installation, you will not even notice any kind of delays or errors because you're going into a timeout. If we speak about an enterprise level scenario where you have, I don't know, 1,000 and 10,000 devices, there definitely even sending out comments and getting status back to UMS might be tough if you don't have enough resources assigned. But the download process of a firmware, of a custom partition, if it's still located inside of the UMS and not on a separate HTTPS or SFTPS server, is really demanding. So it impacts a lot if you speak about the download process itself.
Perfect. And Randall Cruz, one of our VIPs, just posted a possible answer to the question about inventory. I believe with the newer UMS, you can run a SQL query that you can get the make and model of the devices, as well as things that are installed on the Dragon or on it. As an example, Dragon mics, printers, etc. Randall, if you know that SQL query, maybe you can post it in the chat or post it in the community. We'd love to know that.
Please.
Yeah. The next question is. This is a goodie. When will we remove Java from all the products? I guess we're working towards that, right? The web app is and we just released a new version of UMS web app on Monday, and that'll be a gradual process. You can't spend all your time just moving things from one app to another, but we don't have a set deadline, and from what we know, when that'll happen, but it is in process. Sebastian, anything else to add?
No, perfect. Agree.
Perfect. Will we ever be able to update IGEL endpoints BIOS via the UMS?
Oh man, I wish we could since years, but it's coming. I cannot say something more than it's coming. It's not only coming, it's planned. To get BIOS, BIOS configurations in the first step and BIOS updates in general, it's planned. Let's call it this way, and I'm expecting it, but just my personal view. I'm expecting it this year, hopefully.
That's great. That's really great to hear. So stay tuned to the community. As soon as we know more, we'll definitely share that. And then again, these are great questions for when Matthias comes on.
Oh, yeah.
He might tell you. He might say this is planned for this build, or no, it won't hit this year, but next year, or in Q4, what have you. So those are great questions for Matthias. So if you had a large enterprise looking to use IGEL, is there a limit to users?
I would be happy to answer the question, but I'm not sure if I get it right, because I was speaking about the UMS users, which I don't expect to be an issue at all. But if we speak about a limit about how many endpoints can be managed by the UMS, that's a different story. So I would try to cover both of them. So limit to users, I would not be aware of any kind of limitations. I have people who are using the UMS with 1,000 users. I must admit, not more than 1,000. It's more or less 900 to 1,000 users, and that works pretty fine. I have no issue at all, but they're using HA, I must admit. On the endpoint themselves, well, it's difficult to say. It depends a lot from what you are doing there. But if we speak about a standard environment, you can have at least something between 5 and 20,000 devices with one server if you want. But it depends from the amount of RAM, about your network adapters, and also your CPUs assigned to that device. Let me share. I would just shut for in a couple of seconds the sizing document that went created thanks to our Advanced Services Codex, and share it in the question and answer section, just because it might cover your question like you expected, because there you have also what happened if you have up to 300,000 devices. So you have a sizing there too. So that's at least a number or a figure I can share with you. So let me jump in, and I will put it into the chat itself, because I guess the question was already answered. No, I can answer it again.
Yeah, so, you do that, Seb, and I'll take the next question. I know the answer to this one. Can you manage the UMS from a client? Absolutely. You can install the UMS on a Windows device. Just go through the installs, choose UMS only, admin only. There are steps on how to do this in the Getting Started guide. So if you head to IGELCommunity.com and download the Getting Started guide, there's a few steps in there on exactly how to install the UMS administrator and run it from a Windows machine. And of course, you do have the UMS web app that is not feature parity, but if that suffices for what you need to do, you can get to from any device. So. Did you find it, buddy? You can also post it in Slack.
It's already sent out.
Oh, it's already posted. See, he's always one step ahead of me. What can I do? So web app gets all functions as UMS. At some point, yes. That's definitely the direction we're working towards. It does take time. There's a lot of reasons why. The biggest reason is just time. There's many features we want to put into IGEL OS, into UMS, into the entire product suite, right? And if we spend all of our developer time just optimizing moving things over to the web app, we would have no other new features. So it does take time. It is a big process, and it's it's a lot of work. So, but we are definitely moving in that direction, and that's been stated by Matthias and everybody. So it's definitely going there. Is it possible to create a view based on asset inventory, like it's looking for devices with a specific USB device?
Yes and no at the same time. So yes, if you're using the asset inventory tracker, but it's not. Let's go a step backward. Creating a view based on the hardware, yes, no issue at all. If your device is an Intel or an AMD one, whatever you like. If you want to monitor devices connected to your endpoint, that's another story, and that's where the asset inventory tracker is coming, and where you can use it in a view. I would have to double check because I don't use asset inventory tracking a lot, I must admit, just because I didn't find an asset ID, asset inventory. Would have to double check, to be honest, but I was expecting that at least you would be able to use in a view. So you have an asset inventory and you should be able to use the connected devices function, was it called, if I remember right. Would have to double check, but yes, you can at least create a report. And if it's not a view, I can definitely forward you an SQL query I used.
Perfect, perfect. When will the RX420 Citrix Hub be in production? Is that is referring to Citrix Workspace Hub, I imagine?
Yeah, exactly. I cannot say more than we are working quite closely together with Citrix to get the legal stuff sorted out. But at the moment, I can just say as soon as possible. We might have a call tomorrow with the end computing project team. If I'm getting something new there, I will share it with with next week. No, it's tomorrow. So if I have something to share, I will post it into the community afterwards.
Perfect. And where in the IGEL community you didn't think I'd read it, Stuart. Where in the IGEL community can we log complaints about Doug and Sebastian? This is actually a good question, believe it or not. We do have a piece in a feedback area in the IGEL community called Community Feedback. So if you're unhappy with us, definitely let us know. But if you have suggestions, right? If there's things you like, let us know. But if you have suggestions, someone posted, hey, I would love you guys to do a webinar on buddy updates and firmware updates. Okay, we listen, we'll do it, right? So please let us know what you think of the community. We do have our survey at IGEL, or survey.igelcommunity.com. Please use that to let us know if you like us. 9 or 10 is great on the last question, but be honest. And so, that's the best place, really. I know it was a sort of a joke, Stuart, but believe it or not, that is very valuable to us because this community is your community. We try to do what we think is best for you guys, what helps you. And when I founded the community, the whole idea was for me to please the Doug Brown of 20 years ago when I was in the trenches doing what you guys do today. Right. And, I'm running out of ideas. So please let us know what you think. Give us your ideas and we'll make those come to life. So what else do we have in here, Sebastian?
For apply, we have Peter Doran. For applying profiles in the UMS, we have to apply the profile to either an endpoint or a directory. Is there any way to apply a profile? Yes, yes. Is there any way to apply a profile to a view, or is there a way to create a filter to apply a profile to only set of devices? Yes, yes, and yes. So first of all, I can just show it. Maybe it's easier to show. Let me share my screen and minimize everything which shouldn't be seen. Here we go. So you have a view, right? So any kind of views that you created, whatever you like, all devices that are not on 11.05 or whatever. Yeah. So you have your view. Let me just make that one. And now you are here. Right click and assign objects to the devices of a view. Would be a profile, could be a universal firmware update, could be a certificate, whatever you like. But that's a one-time shot. So that's the first part of my answer. Yes, it works exactly like this. Right click, assign object, boom. On the other hand, like explained in the presentation a little bit, if you go to your administrative task, you can also create a job which is called assign objects to the results of a view, or to the devices of a view, and check again your view, check whatever you like to assign. And in my opinion, it makes sense to speak about the universal firmware update because I don't know, you have OS 10 and OS 11 devices inside of a folder, and you cannot assign the actual OS 11 11.05 520 to an OS 10 device. So you create a view, and then you assign the universal firmware update files to only the result of the view where devices with OS 11 are integrated. Or if you speak about devices that might be a buddy master needs to get the update from the UMS, so you assign it there. But on the other devices that are buddy slaves, you don't assign anything. Boom, that's definitely a task for the administrative task again. So that was just my short explanation about this question. Hope it answered.
Can we expect an LTSR firmware build for the operating system that's on the endpoint at some point? And I believe Matthias said we're working in that direction, correct?
Yes, I will keep the answer in. We're working that way on OS 12, to be honest. So we might expect something in that direction. Just keep in mind that we have a tool called ids.nolt.io, where we already have an idea regarding LTSR versions. And if you think that it's also relevant to you, ids.nolt.io. And actually,
that's wrong. It's ideas at IGELcommunity.com or igel.nolt.io.
Thank you. I was thinking, okay, my mistake. So just go there and upvote, please, the LTSR feature, because there you have the ability to upvote or downvote features that you want to see or don't want to see inside of our product. And the LTSR topic is already pretty hot there, and it's already on our list. But as many people would like to have it, just more pressure we can give on our product management colleagues.
Absolutely. I just read something telling me that I need German beer. Yes, I do need German beer. See, are there any plans? And the URL again is ideas.igelcommunity.com. That's the best place. Ideas.igelcommunity.com. Please head over there if you have any feature proposals, ideas, anything, post them there. And also, like Sebastian said, look through the list and upvote what you like, and you can also leave comments too. So if you want to leave some, you can start a thread or continue a thread or what have you. Are there any plans to integrate MS Teams? Currently works brilliantly as a custom partition, but we would like it would be great to be integrated. I don't know if we can do that. That would be a licensing thing, right? With Microsoft.
I mean, we could. From a technical perspective, we could definitely. It's the same discussion with Zoom. It's the same discussion with TeamViewer. Let's say it's in general discussion with the software vendor. So the answer is technically yes, we could. From a legal perspective, I'm not sure if we are investigating in the Teams direction at the moment. I remember that we had a couple of discussions with Zoom, but like I said, just discussion. So I cannot promise or say it will come or not come. But it was at least in discussion, especially during the COVID phase last year. But I cannot promise it at the moment.
Yeah, and also I think IGEL OS 12. And as we start moving into discussing more about what this means, and if you refer back to some of the meetups we had with Matthias, forget exactly what he said and he didn't say, but I think some of that will be addressed within IGEL OS 12. So definitely stay tuned for that next year. That's going to be, well, the biggest change in IGEL OS history ever, I think, and probably the best Edge OS ever created. Really going to be fabulous. So actually, we use Windows FTP servers in our branches for firmware updates. Is there a benefit to switch to a buddy update?
The short answer without knowing your architecture is no. No. Honestly, you might have, let's say, one or two little advantages, but I guess your FTP server is way more powerful than an endpoint with IGEL OS on it, because I'm expecting that you're not using big devices with an i7 with IGEL OS, but you might, even if it's, I guess, not the usual use case. So if you're having a powerful server, or let's say a quite powerful hardware on the on your branch office side with the FTP server, no. The only advantage you would have if you would use the buddy master, buddy slave concept is that the endpoint might detect automatically the buddy master inside of his virtual LAN. So if you have a virtual LAN with 10 devices and one is buddy master, you don't have to specify it in a profile that you would have to do if we speak about your FTP server, just to give your endpoints the information where they can retrieve the update. So make it short. If you have enough power on your FTP server, you're all good. You will have less administrative tasks to achieve if you keep it like you're doing at the moment. That's my opinion.
You bet, you bet. And here's something I know you've been working with these guys, Sebastian. He says, is it correct that IGEL supports close-up? I think you mean control-up application. If it is, yes, where can we obtain documentation? First of all, we do have, am I right about control-up versus close-up? I don't know of a close-up, correct?
No, it's control-up.
Yeah, and we do have a channel in IGEL Community TP. Hashtag TP-control-up. Definitely join that channel. They're manning it, so you can ask these questions for them. How to, integration best practices, how to set it up, all that jazz, right? Anything else to add there, Sebastian?
No, that's fine. It's perfect. We will have. Oh, just by the way, if you need something regarding control-up, just be aware that we might have an. Let's say an upcoming event together with control-up. So if you have something in your mind where you need, let's say, specific use case information between IGEL OS and control-up, just feel free to reach out to me, and we'll be happy to take it on the list of topics we will discuss with control-up.
You bet. Yeah, we're actively working with those guys, and they're doing some really neat stuff with IGEL that we're going to be showcasing here soon. So we do love working with different. The power of IGEL OS is really the partners and the integrations we have in the operating system. So we love working with these guys in the IGEL community, sharing that stuff with you guys. So the control-up's definitely on top of our list right now. They're doing some really neat stuff. Is there? It is different. Oh, I believe this is probably relating back to the Teams discussion. Is it a different licensing compared to Windows Virtual Desktop? Yeah, I mean, it's all about being able to distribute the application, right? And that's different than a user license. It's more of a legal software distribution license that a software company has with another software company, correct?
Yeah, and on the licensing topic, to be honest, I'm getting the IGEL licensing model quite good at the moment. I wouldn't even think about how Microsoft is dealing with Teams, etc. So honestly, I would just shut up myself and saying I cannot answer that question, to be honest.
I've always got away with in my life to say, hey, I'm an engineer. I don't know. Go talk to your sales folks. I don't know anything about licensing. Leave it at that. But I believe it's when you talk about embedding software into an operating system or into any piece, it's a different license than, let's say, a user license. It's truly a software distribution license, and it's a contract between two software companies, and that's a whole different process. And there's a lot to entail there. So. But like I said, wait for IGEL OS 12. I think we're going to be doing some neat stuff there. I don't know exactly what 100%, but I think you guys will like it. We're down to 2 more questions. We're going to save Stuart's for last since he threw me a joke. So sorry, Stuart, don't mess with me. What is the easiest way to get an end user to register their endpoint with the ICG? Hey, we just had something neat on that, right? We just had a tip in the, I think Lars wrote something, right? That, in fact, it's on the IGEL community blog or quasi. Well,
to your point, yes, but before going into the fingerprint stuff, so speaking about the fingerprint, you have to enter the fingerprint if you used a self-signed certificate. If you use a public certificate, then you don't need that fingerprint. So it doesn't have to be a wildcard certificate, obviously. It can be a standard public certificate. And then you don't need that fingerprint, which is, let's say, just an additional way of double checking that you are talking to the right UMS with the right certificate. That's the first part of the answer. The second part is if you want to automate the process of registration, then yes, definitely goes the route that Doug just mentioned about Lars Glockner's script and profile, mentioned to the blog, where you can mass deploy a configuration, and that includes also the fingerprint of your certificate without having the need to use a public certificate. So that's using kind of command line command, which is called ICG-config, But to the end user, it acts like a automated process. In the background, it's a command line, but it started with specific parameters like your fingerprint.
Okay, and I love it. The questions keep coming. We'll stick around. I don't know if you have a hard stop, Seb, but you know, I love sticking around. But you guys have questions, we're here to help you. So, will removing features in profile significantly reduce firmware size as of 11.05.120 and/or startup time on older IGEL devices?
Yeah. Short answer is yes. The mid-long answer is yes, and it will increase a little bit, or decrease at least, the boot up time, because you have a little bit less of daemons that are started during boot up process. You will have a less big attack for surface verifier attacks if someone is trying to break in your device, because you have demons, network demons who are listening to something. But the main purpose of disabling features is first gaining some space, because you might have a device that have not enough SSD space, so you have to reduce the amount of firmware update files. First thing. Second thing, you want to decrease the network consumption when you're transferring your firmware update file to an endpoint. So that's the second thing where it makes sense to disable some features. Then having a little bit less power consumption, because you have a little bit less processes started. And the fourth one is the security perspective.
Got it. And a question just came in. You talked about Microsoft's Teams not playing nice legally. We didn't mean that. We didn't say there's no legal issues with it. It's just about when you start embedding people's software, you're embedding their intellectual property into your platform, and then you're selling your software with their software in it. That opens up, that's an issue with when you embed other people's software into your software. So it's not, I wouldn't say they're not playing legally nicely at all. It's the same with every piece. It's actually the same with public domain software. What is it? I'm tired. What's the name of the open source software? Believe it or not, open source software, if you really want to dive into it, if you write an app and you put a bunch of open source software in there, you have to be real careful. One, you're never going to get a VC to fund the company unless you yank all that stuff out. Or you have to clearly document it and get approval. It's a nightmare. Trust me. We wrote a web app and got a VC funded, and we had to yank out every little bit of open source software. So it's not that they're not playing nicely. It's just when you start using other people's code or other people's binaries and put it in yours, and then you distribute that, then you have legal relationships you have to create. So it's there's more to it than meets the eye. So is there support for VMware Horizon multimedia redirection coming? For Teams? It's coming, right? We're just waiting.
Yes and no. So right. So if you speak about the optimization process with the Teams plugin, that's right. It's not included at the moment, but we're expecting it. We're expecting it. I cannot promise if it's in 2 weeks, in 2 months, or in 2 years. Hopefully just in 2 weeks, but at the moment I cannot promise it. So for the moment, the only thing that you might have is to use the standard approach of using the multimedia redirection and the real-time audio video, but it's not the same like on Citrix, where you have a full-blown engine where you can do that. The only thing that I remember is available at the moment is Zoom, which is performing quite good if you are working on an actual IGEL OS firmware. But on the other hand, Teams is not there at the moment.
Perfect. And our very last question, this is from our main man, Stuart. I absolutely love this question because it's really, and I'm going to ask it to you, Sebastian, because I think you really give a good answer to this question. I know you like talking about it in some ways, and you love this program. So Stuart writes, my participation in the IGEL community and the Insider program is one of my favorite parts of my job these days. Thank you very much. That really means a lot to me, and I know Sebastian also. What a great compliment. Thank you. What can new users do if they're interested in qualifying for this program? So my question to you, Sebastian, is really two-phased. One, answer his question. And two, what is the Insider program? What is the VIP program? What kind of benefits, and why does Stuart like it so much? Well, that question is for Stuart, but...
That's right. So I will keep at least definitely the first part of the question. So the first part from my side is just be active. I mean, just be active. If there is something that you can answer, just answer. If you think that you might have an answer, it's more than enough that you might have an answer. Just enter something which help other people, because we are all in calls, or we might have an appointment, and we are here to help each other. So if there is something where you as a community user are thinking, hey, I know the answer. If someone is asking how to create a view like an example, if you are just sharing a screenshot and just 2 words with that, one thing, just help each other. Second one, and even if it's not easy, because we are all having troubles, we are all having an interesting phase at the moment with this pandemic, and we might have also a lot of stress at work or in private, but be gentle. Be just polite, or let's say as polite as possible, and just respect yourself. So be respectful to each other. That's definitely one big thing that needs to be achieved to get inside of the Insider program. Just be there and be gentle. Just be yourself as you would like to be treated if someone is talking to you.
You got it.
Last but not least, if you have content that you created for your company, or that you created for yourself, or you created for your blog, or whatever, sharing stuff, sharing information, sharing experiences, sharing stuff that you face, also issues that you are facing that you solve that might not be related to Azure, but maybe to, I don't know, Citrix or WVD or whatever. Share it with us. Share it with the rest of the Azure community. That would be my 3 answers to one question.
I 100% agree with you. It's all about sharing. Every single person in this community knows something that somebody else doesn't know, whether you think you do or not. And if we all went out and had a beer and we all chatted about tech, we're all going to learn from each other. That's what I want for the IGEL community. That's what Sebastian loves about the IGEL community. That's what we love about being techies. Right? When I was a younger engineer, we'd all go out and smoke back in the day. One by one, we all quit, or they quit. And but we learned so much because we just sat out there and talked to each other. We shared with each other. You know, the best thing you can do is just share what you know. You know, if you wrote something, share it. If you just have an idea, share it. Right? Just be part of the community. Have some fun too. I think probably the reason Stuart likes it so much is we're having fun. And, you know, if you can't have fun, go find something else to do, is my view. Right, Sebastian? That's what I always tell you. And what do you get by joining the program? Everyone's under NDA. We tell you what's coming. We share the weekly updates from our product management. When the Raspberry Pi device, the RPI-4, was coming out, they knew about it way in advance. We do briefings with our internal people, from Matthias Haas, our CTO, to Jed Ayers, our CEO, to the product managers within the company. You know, we do send them free t-shirts. They got a nice little trophy, things like that. But that's the least of it. Really, it's the knowledge and the fun that we're having. But we do try to leave, not just keep the fun in the Insider program. And in fact, if someone's chatting with, we do have a private group too, but if someone's chatting and having some fun, we say, hey, do that publicly, because we are one community. We're not 2 separate groups. Thank you, Falk. So yeah, that's it. A lot of fun, guys. I hope you enjoyed this session. We went way long, although Sebastian, you did a great job keeping it right on top of the hour. But you know, we'll stick around and do Q&A as long as you guys have the questions. And we really love that you're active and that so many people stick around and listen to us. Right? What a joy. So, Sebastian, thank you personally so much for all these things. We have many more planned. I guess we have a buddy updates. I didn't know if you know this, but get ready to create one on that soon, Seb. So,
yeah, we didn't came to the end, so I still have a few slides that I would share next time. So, like I said, it was just part 1. We'll have a part number 2, and on the same stuff we have an upcoming session, like Doug already mentioned, with troubleshooting stuff. So it will just keep growing and keep coming. So if you have something you want to see, write it to us, and we'll be happy to cover it, or find someone who might be able to cover it.
You got it. You got it. And if you'd like to come in and do something, a Q&A with us, anything, we do written Q&As, anything, just message us. If you want to be active, you want to have some fun with us, let us know. We love the company, love doing things with all these fine folks, even Stuart. We love Stuart too, on a good day.
Definitely.
So on that note, thank you all for joining this IGEL Community Deep Dive Tech webinar. And Sebastian, thank you so much. And thanks all the great questions. And what a fun time. What a fun time.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day and a great week.
Tschüss.
Tschüss.